the outset, it seems appropriate that you should know that I am neither a Muslim nor an Islamic scholar. Like Dr. Moore and Johnson, I work in the field, this is my area of research, in embryology, and it is a science that is concerned with all the changes that occur with the embryo, that is before birth, from the time of conception, that leads to the formation of a new individual. Rihal, one of the organizers of this evening's presentation, has brought to my attention that we have an audience from varying backgrounds, scientists and non-scientists, people with a wide range of interests. I've tried my best to organize what I will present to you with the great hope that there will be something for everyone. And if there are any questions or ambiguities, then my colleagues and I will try to answer these at the end. Religion and science do have some common goals, one being the pursuit of truth and the search for enlightenment. Fundamental to science and religion and philosophy is the question, the universal and timeless question regarding the nature of man. Indeed, we find just such a question in the Holy Quran. And if I may have the next slide, this first slide was so appropriate for the prayer. In fact, I brought it because it's a slide I always use for focusing the other slides. And it's such a pretty thing to look at this time of the year. Here we have a verse, a surah, which states, "From what substance had he created him?" And this is the timeless question of not only science or all philosophical discussions, but also of all religions. And in fact, this is what embryology is all about. As much as embryology deals with the genesis of all life forms, its history is inextricably related to the historical development of both scientific and philosophical thought. There are three phases if we look at the history of embryology, because we have to go into this a little bit in view of the fact of what I'll be telling you later with respect to the Quran. If we look at the history from time of antiquity up to the turn of the period with the beginning of our way of counting the years, we find that it was one where speculation predominated. And then came a descriptive phase where people observed things that were happening with chicken embryos or animal embryos, and they were describing those. And not until the 18th or 19th century, a new phase began where people began to play, to manipulate the embryo. They began to experiment with the embryo to understand how it develops. And that is what one would call an experimental phase. And more recently, there have been some very revolutionary approaches, the ultra-modern approaches, involving techniques we wouldn't need to talk about, that add a new dimension to our understanding of what happens with the embryo or fetus in utero, in the womb. As marvelous and awesome the discovery relating to human development before birth this century might be, there is so much that has already been recorded in the Holy Quran, some 1400 years ago. That is, long before any instrument or object, a tool, a microscope, or a lens might have been discovered to look at a structure in order to magnify it. Now, I have to pause here for a moment because I will ask your understanding. It's something that it took even a person like myself to grasp, and that is for you to relate to the time period we are talking about. If you go back 1400 years ago, or even 1800 years ago, we are in a different time frame, in a very entirely different environment. where perhaps they were thinkers, but no scientists in the sense that we know them, in the sense of people with white lab coats working in a laboratory doing experiments. They were simple people looking at things, making observations and describing these observations. They were scientists too, but they were of a different kind. And when they saw something that was unusual or something worth noting, they recorded these things too. And they were recorded with an equal simplicity. And this is what is the first point I want to draw your attention to, is the fact that if we were trying this evening, or we would try this evening, or you would be trying on your own, to relate the modern discoveries of scientists pertaining to the embryo, and as recorded in the great journals and scientific literature you find in the libraries today, to what has been recorded 1,000 years ago, then that would be difficult, because you're dealing with two entirely different environments, two different sets of people, different values, different criteria, different ways of observing things. But profound is the elegant simplicity. The elegant simplicity we find mentioned in the Quran, some remarkable statements on human prenatal development. And if I may have the next slide, please. From what substance had he created man? This, as I said, is one of the fundamental questions of religion and science. And a good starting point is perhaps with this gentleman you have here on the screen, Aristotle, who is known for a great many things. But he was the most celebrated thinker, philosopher, scientist of antiquity. He lived in the 4th century BC. 400 years, approximately, 382 to 382 to 324 BC. And he seems to be a very appropriate starting point, because with him we could sort of grasp the kind of thinking that went on before. And we could see what the level of understanding of the embryo was at that time, about 400 years BC. Now Aristotle wrote in his book, which translated in English means the generation of animals, meaning the reproduction of animals, and a book he considered to be his masterpiece. In fact, both Charles Darwin, who many of you would know of, and a very famous scientist, Isaac Newton, they thought that Aristotle was the greatest scientist that ever lived. Aristotle, in his book, which he himself considered to be a masterpiece, wrote that the embryo evolved from the egg, and the egg comes from the female. Even though the psyche, that is the principle of life, was derived from the male, but how he did not know. And the womb merely serves as an incubator for the formless mixture of menstrual flow and semen. For centuries after Aristotle, the thought was that the womb was an incubator, and the menstrual flow somehow coagulated with the semen. And essentially what happens is that the embryo is formed, or the potential for the embryo to be formed exists once a month, not because of an egg, but because of the menstrual flow. This was the concept for centuries. And even, if we may have the next slide please, after the discovery made by this gentleman, who lived in the 17th, the latter part of the 17th, and the early part of the 18th century. And this is a gentleman, a Dutchman, by the name of Leeuwenhoek, some of you would have heard of the name, who found a way of taking a piece of glass and grinding it, putting it together, making a microscope, how simple it might have been, to make things look bigger. This was not discovered until about 200 to 300 years ago. And when this discovery was made, then one was in a position to look at an egg that might have come from a dog, or to look at an embryo that might have been developing like a chick embryo. But it did not add anything new as far as our understanding until much later with respect to the contribution, the relative contribution of the male and the female towards the formation of a new individual. To make my point very clear to you, I will show you on the next slide what one saw in the 17th century in the head of sperm. It just shows the extent of one's imagination. And there are, in the libraries of the world, you'll find many volumes, books with hundreds of pages of drawings showing you a little man, a little dog, a little rabbit, a little girl sitting in the head of a sperm. And that was supposed to be, some of you would know, the so-called homunculus, which over a period of 9 months or so in the womb would unfold and become a new individual. So the theory was now changing and shifting from the menstrual flow, the female egg, to now solely the male. And again, the uterus or womb was like an incubator. And this was 200-300 years ago. If we may have the next slide, please. But here we have a statement which I find most remarkable personally. Because here is a statement coming from a much earlier period. In the Holy Quran, we find in this Surah 39, the remarkable statement, He makes you in the wombs of your mothers in stages, one after another, in 3 veils of darkness. It's a surah I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's a very simple statement. But then reflect back again what I've said at the very beginning. The time period we are thinking of, it's not in the 20th century. A lot of us looking at this statement in the 20th century would look at it and say, it's a very trivial, frivolous statement. It's true, so what's the big deal? But if you go back in time and think, it's a profound statement with very important facts. It says, He makes you in the womb, in the uterus of your mothers, in stages. It's not something that is formed completed, as I showed you earlier, that will unfold itself. It's a progressive thing. One after the other, there is a stage that is formed, and it leads to another stage, and there's another stage, and then there are 3 veils of darkness which surround these different stages as these stages unfold. And if we may have the next slide, please. And here is a photograph I have. I've drawn very heavily from the works of my colleagues, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Moore, particularly Dr. Moore, because on previous occasions they have talked on these topics, and I felt that why should I reinvent the wheel? And I've gone back to their work and referred to it. And in fact, this slide you're seeing here is one that is taken from Dr. Moore's paper that he presented, I believe, to this group on a previous occasion. And it shows here the embryo, or fetus as it is now, in the womb, and 3 veils of darkness as Dr. Moore at that time conceived it, and is willing to change his mind because of discussions we have had with Islamic scholars over the years. And there are all sort of variations to this, but the important thing is, if you look, you'll see here the wall of the abdomen, of the belly, the wall of the uterus, and here what is known as the amnion and chorion for those who are in the audience. Some may say if you dismiss the wall of the abdomen, you could have the wall of the uterus, you could have the amnion, the chorion, and what is known as the decidua. These would be things that do exist, that we could not have known of their existence. The most, if anyone could have conceived of, well, sure, it is in the uterus, and outside of the uterus we have the abdominal wall. The third would have still been difficult to have known about, but here we have recorded these 3 veils of darkness, surrounding the embryo as it is unfolding its stages in its development. Next slide, please. Now, if we go back in history, and as one of my hobbies, I'm interested in the history, like many of you, of medicine, and this is one of the things that got me involved in what I'm doing here this evening, because of the attraction of bridging the two things, the science, history, and religion. We find that there are many drawings depicting the womb, but none with a fetus in it, or an embryo. This is the first you're seeing. The first known drawing that was made in the 14th century by the famous, celebrated Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci was probably one of the greatest of geniuses to have lived, a man accomplished in so many areas. And here we have a drawing of the womb in which he depicted a child sitting in it. And this is the first we know in the 14th century. That's almost 1,000 years after. I'm not saying that there might not have been the concept or the view that the uterus could contain a child or a fetus, but here is the first depiction of that. Next slide, please. But here is a surah, one again, very powerful, very profound, in fact the whole of embryology here, and one of great but elegant simplicity. We, God, created man from a quintessence of clay. We then placed him as a nutfa, drop, in a place of settlement, firmly fixed. Firmly fixed. Each statement here is profound. The nutfa, place of settlement, firmly fixed. Then we made the drop into an alaqah, a leech-like structure. And then we changed the alaqah into a mudghah, chewed-like substance. Then we made out of that mudghah bones, itham, and then we clothed the bones with flesh, laham. Then we caused him to grow and come into being and attain the definitive form. So blessed be God, the best to create. Here we see not only a description of the stages, but names given to the stages. Names given to the stages that accurately characterize the features of those stages as we know them today. And these were descriptions and names that have been put together 1400 years ago. Could I have the next slide, please? Now the nutfa. What is the nutfa? There are many concepts of this. The word may have two meanings, as Dr. Jonsson wrote in one of his papers. It could be a drop, and the second is a small amount of water. And many interpreters of the Quran have referred to this meaning of the word. As stated in the Quran, we then placed him as a nutfa in a place of settlement. You must bear in mind that when this was mentioned in the Quran, at that time, scientists, if they can be called scientists, or thinkers and philosophers, believed that the human being was created from menstrual blood. The place where the nutfa rests in the uterus has been described in the Quran as garar, a place of settlement. In recent years, science has discovered many facts regarding the collective description of how the uterus expands to accommodate